What's up, wizards? Welcome back to Across the Horizon, a collaboration between Renaissance Astrology and Hacking Fate. With me is Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and I'm Michael Beeson of Hacking Fate. We've decided to throw something else out there. You guys have been having two translations, but we have improved that. We now have three translations, partly because this is a really ambiguous question and the translations seem to contradict themselves. So we figured, why not add the Henry Coley translation? Would you like to go ahead and get us started with reading Aphorism 13?
Yeah, I'm going to start with Ashman. And all these three translations appear on my website. If you search Liber Fructus or Centiloquium or Ptolemy, you can find them all three translations on my website. So Ashman says for Aphorism 13, in every indication made by the constitution of the heavens, secondary stars, whether auxiliary or injurious thereto, are also to be used.
And I'll go ahead and go with the new shiny one because it's new and shiny. Henry Coley says, when the position of the heaven shall signify anything to come to pass, make use in the business as assistants the malevolent planets, though in the question they were not friendly.
Okay, and I'll do Partridge. And Partridge says, when the position of heaven shall signify anything to come to pass, make use in the business of the two malevolent Saturn and Mars, though in the nativity they were not friendly. Boy, those are just all over the place, aren't they? It's just crazy.
So does this apply? What does this apply to? Is this natal, horary, mundane?
Here's what I think. I think that I don't think there's a huge difference between natal and horary when you're talking about this sort of stuff. Here's one of the things I like about it. When I'm doing a horary question, and I think it's true in natal as well to a certain extent, but you have, in fact, I would say it's true in natal in terms of the methodology that I use, which I have a kind of a horary style method. So when I'm looking at a question or looking at a natal chart, it's house-based, right? So that's how I kind of organize it. So for example, if you're looking at money, I mean, I had it today, someone asked me about money. They said, will I have enough financial, will my finances be okay for the next 12 months? So my focus in that was the first house and the second house, right? And it's the same thing if I was going to be asking about someone's natal chart, I'd look at the second house and the financial indicators. Main indicators, the primary story is going to be told by that house, those house rulers and the planets in that house. But you're going to have some secondary and possibly even tertiary indicators. Like, for example, in a financial question, you might look at Jupiter as a natural ruler of wealth. You might look at the part of fortune. Or, for example, fixed stars. People ask me, well, what do you use fixed stars? I'm like, sure. Again, they're secondary or tertiary indicators. So Spike is a fixed star, very benefic, very good. So let's say you had Spike arising, right? But you had the rule of the second was in detriment and retrograde. The sun was combustion, not the sun, but the moon was combustion in the second house. The Jupiter's retrograde, part of fortune's ruled by a planet in detriment, et cetera, et cetera. But Spike is rising. You're like, oh, good, I'm going to be rich because Spike is rising, right? So, part of it is how do you use those secondary and tertiary indicators, right? And so I do think that I'm not really sure what they're getting at in this. I mean, because they start flipping around because they talk about Saturn and Mars as being helpers. They talk about secondary indicators, things like that. But what it kind of clicks into is I have a sort of rap about, don't overthrow your primary signification and don't overthrow multiple indications with a single secondary or tertiary indicator. I mean, obviously in any chart that Saturn and Mars are significators, you're going to be paying attention to them, whether they're malefic or not, and I wouldn't necessarily be popping into a natal chart and looking at Saturn just for no reason. I would need to have some reason to look at it. So did you have any more insight into possibly what this was getting at, or what the meaning of this aphorism was?
No, I mean, it really does just seem that you need to take note of all the things. I mean, it's without us tackling the Latin and translating it ourselves, I don't really see us being able to resolve it based on these three translations, because each of these three translations seems to say something slightly different. I think you already kind of covered everything, because doing the way that horary is laid out by like William Lilly and everybody, basically, you have that house base. So you look for the Lord of the Second and see what it's up to. And then you look at natural significators and see what they're up to. So at that point, we're taking the language of the natural significators and very things being secondary or tertiary or whatever. I'm not really sure. Make use of the business as assistants, the malevolent planets. It's it's a really
I think it's
confusing
garbled.
thing.
I bet you if you looked at the original, it's really garbled and it's hard to understand. And that's why these guys, because sometimes it's really obvious, everybody's kind of in agreement and they have a different way of expressing it, but it's pretty clear what I guess the point that I would make is this, is that I think that when you do either natal or horary, which are predictive, that what you need to be doing is looking through the chart at the underlying spiritual patterns. And so what you're looking is a patterning, right? And in order to get the patterning, you're going to want to look at the primary significators, the secondary, and maybe even the tertiary. You want to look at everything, see what's there, right? But then in you weaving your story, you want to make sure that you're not overthrowing that overall pattern with any individual factor. And so it's funny because I translated along with John Michael Greer Picatrix, and he did the heavy lifting. He probably did 75% of it and all the heavier philosophical passages. And I stuck with the astrological stuff. But it's funny because he said, my Latin's terrible. He said, you're actually pretty good at translating because you come up with something coherent out of it. And it's no point in doing a translation that's sort of incoherent, even if it's accurate. And so my translations may not follow the original perfectly, but I like to come up with something reasonable about it. So that's what I would say we've done here. We've looked at three sort of inconsistent, incoherent things. And what I would take out of it is do the whole, right? And always concentrate on the overall patterning and don't get caught up in the little bits, but nevertheless, make sure you look at all the pieces in putting together that complete patterning.
This was short, and we will see all of y'all next week.